Chapter 20 of Legacy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peak. Legacy by James Schmitz. Chapter 20. Pilch was silent for some moments again, considering the wall screen as if thinking about something connected with it. "Well, we'll drop that for now," she said finally. "Let me tell you what's been happening these months, starting with that first amnesia-covered blank out on Harvest Moon. The Macedon Colonial School has sound basic psychology courses, so there won't be much explaining to do. The connection between those incidents I mentioned and your earlier feeling of disliking plasmoids is obvious, isn't it?" Trigger nodded. "Good. When you got the first service checkup at Commissioner Tate's demand, there was very little to go on. The amnesia didn't lift immediately, not very unusual. The blank out might be interesting because of the circumstances. Otherwise, the check showed you were in a good deal better than normal condition. Outside of total therapy processes, and I believe you know that's a long haul, there wasn't much to be done for you and no particular reason to do it. So an amnesia resolving process was initiated and you were left alone for a while. Actually, something already was going on at the time, but it wasn't spotted until your next check. What it's amounted to has been a relatively minor but extremely precise and apparently purposeful therapy process. Your unconscious memories of those groupings of incidents I was talking about, along with various linked groupings, have gradually been cleared up. Emotion has been drained away, fixed evaluations have faded, associative lines have shifted. Now that's nothing remarkable in itself. Any good therapist could have done the same for you and much more rapidly. Say in a few hours' hard work, spread over several weeks to permit progressive assimilation without conscious disturbances. The very interesting thing is that this orderly little process appears to have been going on all by itself. And that just doesn't happen. You disturbed now?" Trigger nodded. "A little. Mainly, I'm wondering why somebody wants me to not dislike plasmoids." "So am I wondering," said Pilch. "Somebody does, obviously. And a very slick somebody it is. We'll find out by and by. Incidentally, this particular part of the business has been concluded. Apparently somebody doesn't intend to make you wild for plasmoids. It's enough that you don't dislike them." Trigger smiled. "I can't see anyone making me wild for the things, whatever they tried." Pilch nodded. "Could be done," she said, "rather easily. You'd be bats, of course. But that's very different from a simple neutralizing process like the one we've been discussing. Now here's something else. You were pretty unhappy about this business for a while. That wasn't somebody's fault. That was us. I'll explain. Your investigators could have interfered with the little therapy process in a number of ways. That wouldn't have taught them a thing, so they didn't. But on your third check, they found something else. Again, it wasn't in the least obtrusive. In someone else, they mightn't have given it a second look. But it didn't fit at all with your major personality patterns. You wanted to stay where you were." "Stay where I was?" "In the Manon system." "Oh!" Trigger flushed a little. "Well." "I know. Let's go on a moment. We had this inharmonious inclination. So we told Commissioner Tate to bring you to the hub and keep you there to see what would happen. And on Macedon, in just a few weeks, you'd begun working that modern inclination to be back on the Manon system up to a dandy first-rate compulsion." Trigger licked her lips. "Sure," said Pilch. "You had to have a good, sensible reason. You gave yourself one." "Well!" "Oh, you were fond of that young man, all right. Who wouldn't be? Wonderful looking lug. I'd go for him myself. Till I got him on that couch, that is. But that was the first time you hadn't been able to stand a couple of months away from him. It was also the first time you'd started worrying about competition. You now had your justification. And we," Pilch said darkly, "had a fine, solid compulsion with no doubt very revealing ramifications to it to work on. Just one thing went wrong with that, Trigger. You don't have the compulsion anymore." "Oh?" "You don't even," said Pilch, "have the original moderate inclination. Now, one might have some suspicions there, but we'll let them ride for the moment." She did something on the desk. The huge wall screen suddenly lit up. A soft, amber-glowing plane of blankness with a suggestion of receding depths within it. "Last night, shortly before you woke up," Pilch said, "you had a dream. Actually, you had a series of 8 dreams during the night which seem pertinent here. but the earlier ones were rather vague preliminary structures. In one way or another, their content is included in this final symbolic grouping. Let's see what we can make of them." A shape appeared on the screen. Trigger started, then laughed. "What do you think of it?" Pilch asked. "A little green man," she said. "Well, it could be a sort of counterpoint to the little yellow thing on the ship, couldn't it? The good little dwarf and the very bad little dwarf." "Could be," said Pilch. "How do you feel about the notion?" "Good plasmoids and bad plasmoids?" Trigger shook her head. "No, it doesn't feel right." "What else feels right?" Pilch asked. "The farmer. The little old man who owned the farm where the mud pond was." "Liked him, didn't you?" "Very much. He knew a lot of fascinating things." She laughed again. "You know, I'd hate to have him find out, but that little green man also reminds me quite a bit of Commissioner Tate." "I don't think he'd mind hearing it," Pilch said. She paused a moment. "All right. What's this?" A second shape appeared. "A sort of caricature of a wild, mean horse," Trigger said. She added thoughtfully, "There was a horse like that on the farm, too. I suppose you know that." "Yes. Any thoughts about it?" "No. Well, one. The little farmer was the only one who could handle that horse. It was mutated horse, actually. One of the life bank deals that didn't work out so well. Enormously strong. It could work 48 hours at a stretch without even noticing it. But it was just a plain mean animal." "Crazy mean," observed Pilch, was the dream feeling about it. Trigger nodded. "I remember I used to think it was crazy for that horse to want to go around kicking and biting things to pieces. Which was about all it really wanted to do. I imagine it was crazy at that." "You weren't ever in any danger from it yourself, were you?" Trigger laughed. "I couldn't have got anywhere near it. You should have seen the kind of place the old farmer kept it when it wasn't working." "I did," said Pilch. "Long, wide, straight walled pit in the ground. Cover for shade, plenty of food, running water. He was a good farmer. Very high locked fence around it to keep little girls and anyone else from getting too close to his useful monster." "Right," said Trigger. She shook her head. "When you people look into somebody's mind, you look." "We work at it," Pilch said. "Let's see what you can do with this one." Trigger was silent for almost a minute before she said in a subdued voice, "I just get what it shows. It doesn't seem to mean anything." "What does it show?" "Laughing giants stamping on a farm. A tiny sort of farm. It looks like it might be the little green man's farm. No, wait, it's not his. But it belongs to other little green people." "How do you feel about that?" "Well, I hate those giants," Trigger said. "They're cruel. And they laugh about being cruel." "Are you afraid of them?" Trigger blinked at the screen for a few seconds. "No," she said in a low, sleepy voice. "Not yet." Pilch was silent a moment. She said then, "One more." Trigger looked and frowned. Presently she said, "I have a feeling that does mean something. But all I get is that it's the faces of two clocks. On one of them, the hands are going around very fast. And on the other, they go around slowly." "Yes," Pilch said. She waited a little. "No other thoughts about those clocks? Just that they should mean something?" Trigger shook her head. "That's all." Pilch's hand moved on the desk again. The wall screen went blank and the light in the little room brightened slowly. Pilch's face was reflective. "That will have to do for now," she said. "Trigger, this ship is working on an urgent job somewhere else. We'll have to go back and finish that job. But I'll be able to return to Manon in about 10 days, and then we'll have another session. And I think that will get this little mystery cleared up." "All of it?" "All of it, I'd say. The whole pattern seems to be moving into view. More details will show up in the 10-day interval, and one more cautious boost then should bring it out in full." Trigger nodded. "That's good news. I've been getting a little fed up with being a kind of walking enigma." "Don't blame you at all," Pilch said, sounding almost exactly like Commissioner Tate. "Incidentally, you're a busy lady at present, but if you do have a half hour to spare from time to time, you might just sit down comfortably somewhere and listen to yourself thinking. The way things are going, that should bring quite a bit of information to view." Trigger looked doubtful.